My name is Dirk Kemnitz. The title of my presentation is How I Teach Science in a Classical Lutheran School and some other stuff. Possibly. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you three questions. Question number one, how many of you teach science? Very good, you might be in the right place. Question number two, those of you that teach science, would you rather not teach science? Be honest. Thank you, one honest person. Hello? Oh, okay, I thought you wanted my attention. Question number three, if you don't teach science and somebody asked you to teach a science class, how many of you would be hesitant? Yeah, my faculty, thank you. No, wait, that's the cheap sheets back there. They're probably going to razz me. The reason I asked those last two questions, I'll answer it this way, a short little story. In my third year of undergraduate work, I had to declare what I was going to do, and I said, I want to be a junior high science teacher. And in my fourth year, all of us teacher candidates had to go out and do our student teaching. And so I went out and obviously elementary ed. And when we all came back, the elementary school teachers, we did a bunch of stuff. One of the things that we did was we had to debrief our experiences teaching. And one of the questions the instructor asked us was, what was the one class that you feared or were most uncomfortable teaching? And the overwhelming answer was science. And the follow-up question was, why? And the answer was, because I don't know anything about science. And that really bothered me. It bothered me for two reasons. Number one, because I love science. I've always loved science. And number two, I wondered if this was typical of the average American. And so I thought, well, if it is, I would like to do something about it as a junior high science teacher and hopefully get kids excited in science. So my presentation today is going to be divided into three parts. The early years of my teaching, what I did and what I learned, the middle years, which is going to be the majority of my presentation, what I learned and what I did, and then at the end, just a little bit of what I do now. A little bit more background about myself. I was raised in Omaha, Nebraska. My father was a professor of chemistry at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And one of the things that my father liked to do from time to time is he'd bring home these cool chemistry experiments that he would, wow his children with. And every time he did them, I'd always say, do it again, do it again, do it again, because they were so cool. And sometimes we'd go to his office and he'd do experiments, and, again, for the wow factor. And I think it had a lot to do with cultivating the science interest in me. And then when I went on to high school and college, I took all the science courses that I could because I just love science. Now, I'm not like a university professor or even a high school science teacher. I don't have a lot of depth of knowledge of anything. I love science, but I love all science. And so if you're here and you want to ask me questions about inorganic chemistry and how it relates to some kind of DNA research, you come again to the wrong person. I can't do that. All right, so I graduated from Concordia Teachers College in Seward, Nebraska in 1981 with a degree in elementary education and a concentration in science. And you might be wondering, why in December? This guy really knows his stuff and he got done in 3.5 years, right? If you're thinking that, you're absolutely wrong. I liked the social aspect of college too much. And so I intentionally didn't take a full load several times. And when I got to the end of 4 years, I didn't have enough credits to graduate, so I had to go another semester. So 4.5 years, I graduated. I did not want to go right into teaching at that time. I didn't like the idea of coming into a school in the middle of the year. I wanted to start fresh with the kids. So I sat out a semester, and it was a good thing I did because I proposed to my wife and we got married during that time. And then in July of 1982, we moved to Houston, Texas, because I had accepted the call to our Savior Lutheran School. Then in August of 1982, I began teaching, among other things, junior high science. Now, that was 1982, it's now 2022, and I'm still there at our Savior Lutheran School. And during those 40 years, I've done all kinds of things there at the school, but the one thing that I've done every year without fail is I've taught junior high science. I've always done that. And, moving on, the early years. And I call the early years from 1982 to 1989, those 7 years. And in those 7 years, I taught strictly from a textbook because that's how I learned, right? My whole academic career, I learned from a textbook when I went student teaching. I learned from a textbook when I got to our Savior in 82, what was waiting for me? Textbooks. And so I strictly taught from a textbook. And I taught the way that my teachers had taught me. Lecture, give notes, give a test, move on. Well, after about 3 or 4 years, one summer, I was reflecting on the previous school year. And one thing that had come up, and it actually had come up several years, that bothered me was when it went like this. I would teach a chapter in a science book, give the notes, give the test, and then move on to the next chapter. And somewhere in that next chapter, a concept would come up which related to something in the previous chapter. And I would say to my students, you see how this goes along with whatever, X, Y, and Z in the previous chapter? And I'd get these blank looks on their face. And I say, don't you remember? And they would say, no, Mr. Kemnitz. We study the notes the night before the test to take the test and we move on. And it bothered me because I wanted to change the world with science. I wanted the kids to learn it and remember it, and it wasn't working. I couldn't get them to get the interest in science that I had. And I didn't know what to do about it. I had no remedy. And so I went on, and in 1989, and by the way, yes, students were not actively engaged, crammed for the test, but then in 1989, our Board of Education said, we want to give the teachers at Our Savior the opportunity to earn a master's degree. And they made it very desirable. They said, we'll pay for everything. We'll pay for the tuition, we'll pay for your books, we'll pay your fees, we'll pay your parking. We'll even pay your mileage to and from the university. Because remember, 1989, there barely was an internet and there was no online instruction. And so they would pay our mileage. And then when we graduate, they were going to give us a 10% increase in pay. Well, that sounded great to me. I mean, I was getting everything paid for. I get a master's degree, I get a raise, and I get a little street cred because now I've got an advanced degree, and maybe that makes me look a little better. And I wanted to improve on myself, but I had no idea what was in store for me, what I was going to learn, and how that was going to change what I was doing. One of the first classes that I took was a methods class in teaching science to junior high students. I mean, that's exactly what it was. And the instructor in this class made us read and read and read and read. And what we were reading was research. Research that had been done over the previous 30 years on the best methods for teaching science to junior high students. And what I read changed everything about the way I viewed teaching science education. To borrow a phrase from the Bible, it was like scales had fallen from my eyes because now I had an answer of what I could do. And what I could do, what I learned to do, was that science was best learned by doing science. Not by lecturing, taking notes, but by doing it. And along with that, what was also very important was discussion time, review and reflection every single day. Now, I'll get into more of that a little bit later on. So I decided, because I didn't like the textbook in the way that the textbook didn't have many activities. And I don't know if any of you ever looked much at junior high textbooks, but I would say at least half of those activities are worthless. They're pointless. And I mean, to me, it's like these people sit down and they write science textbooks, and then the publisher says, okay, now we need some activities. And they're like, okay, and they've got a few good activities. And then they say, we need some more, and they just, okay. They just put some junk in there just to fill up the textbook. So I decided I'd write my own curriculum. And so I did. And over the course of, 4 or 5 years, I had written an entire science curriculum for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Now, what was the outcome of writing my own curriculum? Well, as you see here, I had activities every day. Almost every day I had activities. That's not all that I did. I'm sorry, is my computer in your way? Let's see. No, I just don't know if the cord is long enough.
It's fine.
That's okay, it's okay. It's okay.
We can move.
Yes,
Here's
yes,
our next.
I'm just trying to facilitate. So I had activities, and I'll get more to how I did the whole process in a minute. But what happened was, number one, I had students constantly coming up to me and saying, Mr. Kemnitz, I love science. Science is my favorite class. And I admonished them and said, religion should be your favorite class, but tell me why you like science. And they said, well, science is fun. We get to do things. We're always working with tools and materials. And, you know, sometimes when people hear the word education with the word fun, they don't like that. They don't like those two words in the same phrase. But I really think it's more of a limited vocabulary or a way to express themselves. What they're really saying is, I really enjoy being engaged and working with things and it being interesting. I think that's what they really meant, not like, oh, it's fun and games. So that was the first thing I noticed. The next thing I noticed was their grades were up. Everybody's grades were up. Nobody ever got less than an A or a B in any of my science classes. And I did some research into that because in my graduate work, I also had to take a graduate level statistic course. I don't remember ever taking statistics in undergraduate. And that statistic course really helped me as I learned how to write good questions and good tests. And so one of the things I'd learned also was how to test for validity on a test. How do I know if this question is a valid question, if it's a good question? And so I wrote my own tests, obviously, because I had my own curriculum. And I would, many times at the beginning of this process here, I would give a pretest. Nobody ever passed the pretest because they didn't know anything yet. And then I'd go through the instruction, and then I'd give them a post-test, and they'd get A's and B's. And so that was another way that I knew that this was working. And then for a while, I was giving comprehensive semester exams. And what I was just doing was taking maybe 5 or 6 questions from each of the previous tests that I'd given, put it in one-day exam. And not everybody passed, but the class average was always above this. So that told me that they were retaining the information. Now, over the years, I've had other experiences. I've had some of my former students from a long time ago message me on Facebook. I had this one student who now is a lineman for the electric company. And he said to me, Mr. Kemnitz, the other day I had this situation, this problem at work, but I remembered something we did in science class and it helped me solve the problem. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. He remembered that. And so I've had several different instances like that. And again, I use that as evidence that this was a good way of doing things. Now, how did I write my own curriculum? Well, I did it this way. I always began with the science topic. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to teach broadly light, just light, to 6th graders. Well, what do I want them to know about light? And so I'd sit down with pen and paper, and I would write down everything that I knew about light. Law of reflection, what is refraction, what is diffusion, so on and so forth, lenses, concave, convex mirrors, all these things. When I was done, I exhausted my own information. I'd pull out some textbooks and see if I left something out that was important, some terminology or some concepts, and I always did. And so I would put those down. When I was all done, I had my content. And then I looked for activities, and I had to have at least one activity for every bit of content. Nothing was ever skipped. And sometimes I had several activities for one concept, because sometimes you could do things very quickly. I could do 3 or 4 activities on one concept in one class period. I then produced a timeline. I'd sit down and I'd say, okay, on day 1, what do I want to do? On day 2, what do I want to do? You know, you have to get your scope and sequence out there. And then that concluded with a test. I made my own booklets, little booklets for the kids to follow along and have the activities. And I brought along some old ones, but basically they were like this, just like this. And like this one was on flight. I taught 8th graders all about flight, everything that has to do with that. And it would go by days. And I would develop the instruction, and then we'd go. So basically, my classes would work like this. We would begin every day with a review. What did we do previously, yesterday, or all the days that we started? And then we'd reflect on that. I would ask students questions. Okay, can you think of ways to apply this? Where do you see this happening? Can you tell me more about this? Give them time to digest the information and, see how it might apply to them in the real world or where it might take them later on. And then I would do the instruction. So I would have, it might be a PowerPoint. It might have some demonstrations that I show them on my desk with the PowerPoint. I might act out for them. But there was some form of instruction, and then when they were done, they would take their booklets. I would go through the activity with them. Okay, this is what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be doing it. And then I give them the materials, and away they would go. And this was very important. My principal supported me every step of the way. That's a key thing. You've got to have your principal's support. And I'll get more into that in just a moment. Okay, so the question is, because this is CCLE, is this a classical way of doing things? Well, I believe it is. Around 2004, my school, OSL, made the change to a classical school. And that means that I had to go from everything I'd done up to that point, and I had to learn what it meant to be classical myself and our school. And so I learned Latin over the course of several years. I read a lot of history books, and I read a lot of the classical education books. And I still am not real good at the classical idea, but my principal is wonderful at it. Kate Telke, raise your hand. And she's helped me a lot. I found it very easy to incorporate Latin and history into my science teaching. A lot of science terminology is Latin. And whenever a term would come up, and I still do this today, the terms come up, like for instance, we'll be studying the bones of the body and humerus. And I'll say, all right, kids, humerus, where does that come from in Latin? Oh, second declension masculine. And then ulna, what is ulna in Latin? No, that's first declension feminine. And so we can reinforce Latin as we're doing that, and they can see that Latin is in science. History, I'm going to jump ahead and I'll come back. I don't know if any of you ever heard of this book, The Scientist. Anybody ever heard of this? Okay, I read this book 20 years ago. By the way, it's not written by a Christian. It's written by somebody that's obviously not a God-fearing man. So you'll get that if you do read that book. But what I like about this book is it goes into the history of all the great scientific minds of the past 1,000 years. It gives you that historical context. Okay, when Copernicus was alive, what was going on? Well, we know that he was a contemporary of Luther, right? I think I got that right. And Luther did not like the heliocentric model of the solar system. But all the other things that were going on in their lives, one thing that I had never thought about was during these time periods, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there would be plagues that would strike Europe all the time. And what would these people do when plagues would strike? They'd all go run out to the country, and they would wait until the plague was over, and then they'd come back to the city. Well, that makes sense, because they didn't have any medical treatments for it. Galileo had 2 daughters, and he wasn't very rich. And so he didn't want his daughters to get married, because where's he going to come up with the dowry? So he put his daughters in a convent, so they had to become nuns so they could never get married. Well, that's kind of cool. Or maybe not cool, but it's interesting. And so you get all this, from that book, I got a lot of the background information. And so I can then tell the kids about that. I can tell them about some of Isaac Newton, the things that he did later in his life. I don't know if you know this, but Newton came up with all of his great ideas, I believe, before he was 30. And then he spent a lot of his later life in politics, but also in alchemy. And after Newton died, and I don't know how long after he died, probably quite a while after he died, they got a hold of some of his hair, and they tested it, and it had high amounts of mercury in it, because he was trying to change metals into gold. Finally, I believe a content-driven science curriculum with many hands-on activities, demonstrations, and review and reflection is classical. It does cover the grammar, logic, and even some of the rhetoric of the trivia. Okay, so there's that book. All right, so if you're thinking, I think I might want to go down this road, and if you're not scientifically trained, then I would recommend, number one, you read, and watch science videos on YouTube. I watch YouTube every night, and I've watched science videos. And currently, actually it's been for a while now, I'm really into intelligent design. And I like to watch these videos from these scientists and mathematicians. Anybody here ever heard of John Lennox? You know who John Lennox is? Or Josh, what's his last name? He's a professor at Rice University. The guy from Rice is a inorganic scientist, and
Jim Tour.
Pardon me?
James Tour.
James Tour, that's it, very good. And Lennox is a mathematician. And these guys give these long lectures with very, very compelling evidence, and I want to say evidence, on intelligent design. And they're also very staunch Christians. And they're just wonderful to listen to these guys. I love listening to them. And when you're done, I don't know how much you know about intelligent design, but when you listen to these guys and you read about intelligent design, you really realize it takes more faith not to believe in God than it takes to believe in God, because the astronomical information is stacked against neo-Darwinism. It really is in favor of God. So the next two go together. Map out a strategy, get your principals full support, find a curriculum that fits your style or write your own. When I first started with my own curriculum, I had to come up with materials. Now, a lot of materials are cheap and easy to get, and you can get parents at your school. I have parents donate stuff all the time, because you do a lot of stuff with clothespins, 2-liter bottles, cotton balls, egg cartons. But then there's other things like microscopes and triple beam balance scales. That costs money. And so I went to my principal and I said, "Can you get me some money?" And he goes, "Yep." And he came back the next week, and I now had a $4,000 budget for science. And so I was able to buy a lot of these things to enhance my science curriculum. And then dive in. Students enjoy doing science, enjoy science when they're doing science. Try something new every chapter. So I still do that today. Every time I come to a new chapter or a new unit, I get online and I look for some new activity I can do with them. How many of you heard of teachers pay teachers? Okay, I love that. You can buy whole lessons, whole units, even whole year's curriculum, depending on how much money you want to spend. I mean, you can spend as little as $1.99, or you can spend hundreds of dollars from a curriculum that's been designed by teachers in your area. So I really like going there. Last year I found a activity on binomial nomenclature that I needed to do with my 7th grade life science. And it was a really fun thing, as they would go through using emojis to try to find which, here's the smiley emoji with a hat on. Now, what's the scientific name of this emoji? And so they use the binomial nomenclature until they get to, I don't know, smilius, emojius, or something like that. And they had a lot of fun doing that, but I showed them the process of doing binomial nomenclature. And then, after they had practiced doing that, then we actually did it with real animals. And they really seemed to enjoy it. Keep parents informed. This is what I learned from Kate. And that is send out a weekly newsletter. And so every Saturday, I just really quick, 5-10 minutes, type up this little thing about what we did, so the parents know exactly what you learned that week and what their children did. And then I encourage them to talk to their children about what they did. So there's that added reinforcement coming from the parents, as a child now has to explain again in their own words what's going on. Okay, activities, I've already talked about some of this. Textbook publishers include some, so I do use some activities from textbook. I wish the internet had been around in 1990, because where did I get my activities? Well, fortunately, the professors that I had at the University of Houston in the education department, they helped me a lot with where to get them. Magazines, a lot of science, education science magazines out there that have ads for people selling that stuff. Even the scientific supplier catalogs, like I use Carolina and NASCO, and they sell that kind of stuff. They sell curricula, they sell activities, hands-on activities. It took me a while to find them, but eventually I did. And also when I would find one, it would lead to another one. So, but now they got the internet, so you just type in what you want there. Teachers pay teachers, I mentioned that. Secure funding, then buy and build a resource cache. I have an entire closet, 8 foot, 8 foot by 35 feet with shelving all up and down where I keep all my science stuff. Remember, I've been doing this for 30 years. And so I have a great resource area back there where I can pull my stuff. And then if it's reusable, then it's stored for the next year. I keep asking for funding. Like I said, I have a line item budget. It's not as much as it was before. It's been reduced a couple of times, and now it's down to $2,000, but that's okay. I've made a lot of purchases of things that I still have, so I don't need that much money anymore. Also, like I said, talk to your parents for donations. If you have a parent-teacher organization, our PTL bought brand new, 12 brand new microscopes, really nice microscopes 2 years ago, because the ones that we were using were there when I got there, which means that they were more than 40 years old. And then I was told that they were there when the previous teacher had been there. So now I'm thinking they're 60 years old, and it was time to refresh the microscope. So we bought some brand new microscopes, and I really like these. So they were good.
I have a question on your microscope. So do they hook up to the computers or?
They have that ability,
Okay.
but I don't have any use for that right now.
Yeah, so when we did at our school, getting the microscopes, the high schools are always trying to get rid of them.
Oh.
I shouldn't say get rid of them, but they go down to somewhere else, and
Yeah.
eventually we have some places that actually just refurbish them and they sell them really.
Yeah, so
that's a good way to go.
I actually did that with some of our microscopes. I paid an outfit to refurbish them. They did the best they could. They were really old.
Oh, yeah.
And, I didn't throw the old microscopes away. I asked our teachers, our elementary school teachers, would you like one? And they took them, so now they have a classroom microscope. It still works fine. And we had a lot of prepared slides, and they make them. Grow a garden. I don't know if you all do this, but my kids love this. I do this with my 7th grade every year. I take them out right before spring break. Now, I don't know where y'all are from, but down in Houston, you can start planting in February. So I take them out right before spring break, and we have this big garden area, and we plant our seeds. And then every week we come out, one class period a week, and we weed and weed and weed and weed, because that's mainly what has to be done before the plants are producing. But it's always so funny. These kids have never grown anything before. And so when the tomatoes are ready to pick, or the beans or the cucumbers, every year I get 1 or 2 kids, can we eat it? Yes, you can. What did you think? Well, I thought we were just growing this for enrichment. Well, yeah, but you can also eat this food. What do you think? From Kroger? Yeah, but where's Kroger get the food? Kroger? They don't ever conceive of farms growing things and then being shipped to Kroger. They're like, as soon as I say it, they immediately just dig in. Hey, this is not bad. So grow a garden, it's a lot of fun, and the kids love it. I put this in here because I've talked to some science teachers at Lutheran schools that will never dissect. And I always do dissection. We dissect 4 animals. We do a squid, an earthworm, a crayfish, and a frog. And the frog and the crayfish, by the way, dissection is easy. And most of those animals I listed, with the exception of the frog, are really, really cheap to buy from these supply places. Frogs are expensive. But with my frog and my crayfish, they have to take a lab practical test. If you don't know what that means that they have to actually come to the frog and say exactly what each part is. And then they have to tell me what the function of that part is. And the way I do it, and I learned this from the previous principal, or my principal when I first came, I cut the frog into pieces, and I put 2 pieces at 17 different stations around the outside of my room. And I give the kids a blank piece of paper, and each of the pieces has a number. And they have 30 seconds in each station to write down the 2 parts they're looking at. So it might be the heart and the liver, so on and so forth. That's a lab practical test. I always tell them it's going to be the hardest test you ever took, because it's all fill in the blank, it's all memory, and it's looking at an actual frog. And most of the kids really like dissection. Kids really love dissection, with the exception of you don't have that. So it tends to be more boys than girls that shy away from it. I think with some girls, they've helped their parents prepare like chicken or turkey, and they've actually done some cutting up of the parts to prepare it, so it's no big deal. But there's always that one every year that just crosses their arms and watches their lab partner do all the work. But they still study for the test, and they still do it. Take science-related field trips. So I do 2 every year. One is to the Museum of Natural Science in Houston, and the second one is to a place called the Houston Aquarium. And the Houston Aquarium is a restaurant upstairs, and down below is this incredible aquarium with all kinds of animals, not just fish. And they have these little teaching rooms. So I take them there, and the first class they take is Animal Training 101, where they learn how trainers train animals, and they go through the whole process, and then they actually bring out a couple of animals that they've trained. They've got this macaw. Is that a big bird? I always forget. That can talk, and they do different things, different hand motions, and then the bird will dance or spin around or say words. And then they bring out another animal. It seems to change every year. One year was a sloth, and that was kind of boring. The sloth didn't do much. They brought out, gosh, I can't remember the name. It's a cat from Africa. That's.
Ocelot.
Pardon me?
Ocelot.
No, it wasn't an ocelot. It's from Africa.
Oh.
Servile, something like that.
You're right.
Yeah, that's a beautiful animal. Beautiful animal. We're in this room with this really high ceiling, and they touch way up on the wall, and that cat jumps all the way up to that spot and down. Graceful, beautiful. What else did they brought out? I can't remember. And then the next class is a dissection class, and then we walk through the aquarium and see all the cool stuff. And what's really neat is the very end of the aquarium is 2 white tigers behind glass. And there's beautiful animals. And one year, one of my students started getting too close to the glass and making, and the tiger attacked him. Fortunately, the glass was there. Unfortunately, and consider hosting experts. I have parents from time to time that are in the science fields, and some of them don't want to do it, but some will come out and they'll talk to kids. I had a nurse once come out and type every kid's blood in the class. And that was kind of cool. They all found out, they saw the procedure, and they got to find out what their blood type was. Let's see. Okay, so I'm almost finished. So what happened in later years? About 7 years ago, there was some pressure from a few parents and principal that forced me to rethink my curriculum instruction. I had to move back to a textbook. But I kept most of my activities. Students' interest in science has dropped somewhat. So here's what I do. Every day I read a lecture from the textbook, which is part of my instruction. I show them videos that come with the textbook or from YouTube. Now, I'm not a big user of videos. I don't like showing movies and things because kids usually just tune out and don't pay attention. At one time I would try with the worksheets that would. So if I show anything, it has to be 3 minutes or less, or I'm not going to show it. Which to me, it's a waste of time. I still do a lot of demonstrations. Kids really like cool demonstrations. And then activities, still do a lot of activities, but not as many as I used to do because back to a textbook. And of course I still do a lot of review and reflection with my students. Okay, I think it's very important this is kind of off this a little bit. I think it's very important that I emphasize with my students what a theory is and what is faith. Because when it comes down to it, whether you believe that God created everything or you believe that it happened by accident from an unguided nothing, it requires faith. You have to have faith. So essentially, it's my belief that the public schools and what they teach as to the origins of everything is a religion in and of itself, that they are teaching religion, just not the religion that we want our students to learn. And so I talk about this with my kids so that they understand when somebody says the theory, what exactly does that mean? And what does it take to accept the theory? It takes faith. Should I teach macroevolution? I do. I think it's important that the kids know what's out there, particularly in junior high, because some of those kids are going to go to public school, and they're certainly going to hit it, may need to know how to argue successfully against it. And that's what I spend time with. I'll tell them what it is, and I'll tell them where it goes in the theory, and now here's how you argue against it. And that's why I really like learning about intelligent design and hearing from these incredibly intelligent, wise men about the arguments in favor or against evolution, macroevolution. The other stuff, I didn't know if I needed to talk about that, but I'm finished. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your patience with me.